Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to explain in this video, which is also going to be a podcast, which you can hear on my podcast app at William Wallace for America on any podcast player. And I'll probably have a link down below when I post this video. So if you just want to hear the audio instead of watching the video, you can do that. But in today's video, I'm going to explain my opinion, my hypothesis on where a very big problem with our election system is. I think it's a huge problem. I'll explain it here in just a minute. But as I have circulated groups and talked about election fraud and talked about some of the problems with our election and talked with other people, I have found that this is not something that I have unique information on. It's not something that it's just me that believes in it, but I have found that it is one that is shared by many. And while it hasn't been popular to talk about, it is gaining a lot of steam in the circles where people are more concerned about our elections and making them safer and more secure. And I'm going to explain it not only in this video and podcast, but we're going to talk a little bit more. I'm going to develop it a little bit. So if you could hang in there, I think that you're really going to appreciate the information that I have to offer. Because again, it's not talked about a whole lot, which I'm also going to explain why it's not. So here we go. But before I go into it too much, I want to. This is where I first noticed the inaccuracies in our registrations and how I came up with my hypothesis. Only later to find out that it wasn't me alone, like I said before, but it's when I ran for office and I carried my voter list that I ordered from the Secretary of State, and I carried it with me door to door. And as I started, when I was knocking on doors, and as I really started looking at the list, I found many inaccuracies. I've got my voting list right here that I had with me. We'll get it in focus here in just a second. It's not coming in focus. Sorry about that. There it is a little bit. So this is an actual voting list that I carried with me when I knocked door to door. And as I was knocking door to door and found inaccuracies, I'd find things like, you can go on this voting list. It has a lot of information. Let me explain that first. It has, of course, the address, the name of the people that are living there, actually the name of the people who are registered to vote that are living there. It gives how they're registered, Republican or Democrat. It'll tell you, it even has their phone number and their precinct number. And it'll tell you whether they are a hard Democrat or whether they are a weak Republican, hard Democrat. Are they swing? Are they independent? It kind of gives you all this information on the voting. And it also gives you some other important information which pertains to election fraud, which I will go to in just a second. But before we do that, I'm going to explain another inaccuracy, the inaccuracies I used to see on this list. I would see, knock on a door. You say, hey, is this Mr. Jones? You look at your list. Hi, may I speak to Bob Jones or whoever it would be. And, oh, they moved out a year ago. Or you'd find that in a conversation with people that maybe they aren't the Democrat, maybe they're a Republican. I of course would not ask if they're Republican or Democrat because I'm looking at what I would think would be accurate information. But sometimes during the conversation, they might mention how they're registered to vote. And I'd look down at the paper and they would be registered to vote differently than what they're telling me. So maybe it's not an accuracy on the voter registration list. Maybe they're telling me different information, but oftentimes just in the inaccuracies of how they or who's living there would be enough to tell me that our rolls aren't cleaned up as regularly as maybe they should be. So other inaccuracies might be that, there'd be an address that I would knock on a door, or maybe those people don't live there, as I explained a minute ago. But there also would be times when I'd be in a neighborhood and I'm looking for an address that's on the list and it's not physically there on the street. Sometimes it's maybe because there's an apartment or a duplex and it might be an A or B, but there's enough discrepancies to know that we have problems in our rolls. One thing that I'll give you a tidbit on is that my father, who passed away many years ago, he got jury duty notices for 10 years after he died. I actually ended up calling the clerk of court to get it removed, but it was kind of ironic because these are all related and connected to our voter rolls and voter registrations. So let me explain something that I think getting to where it's really important for, and this is an important piece of information on why I believe that our voter rolls are ripe for the picking, if you will, for voter fraud and ballot harvesting, and where a big problem with our voter rolls are. As I started out this video, got a little off track with some background information. This is a key point that you will that maybe you haven't heard before, that will explain where our biggest problem is. The background information to this is I'm going to explain what a chronic voter is versus a non-chronic voter. And of course, there are even just non-voters who are registered to vote but just never vote. In the campaign world, registered voters on a list get referred to as a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1. And yes, of course, like I said, there are registrations that are never used. And I'll explain what that means. Now, on average, the voter rolls will tell you how many times the people have voted in the last 5 elections, which dictates whether they're a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, or 1. So if they voted 5 out of the last 5 elections, they're a 5. They're also referred to as a chronic voter. Maybe they're a 4 out of the last 5 elections. Maybe they just missed an election. They still get considered a chronic voters. Whether they're, then it goes down the list. Are they a 3 out of the last? Did they vote 3 times out of the last 5 elections? 2 or 1? That is on this list. That will tell people in the campaign world whether or not it's worth knocking on the door of that registered voter's household, because if they're a 1, they're not likely to vote. So a person running for office may never even knock on the door of a 1. But those 5s, those 4s, I'm going to tell you, those people's doors are getting knocked on every election if the campaign or the candidate is indeed looking at his list and he's concerned about it. He's a knock on those doors. Ironically, just a little tidbit about me, when I ran for office, I knocked on every single door in the district, which is kind of how I started realizing that there are inaccuracies on our voter rolls. So, and yes, again, there's registrations that are never used. There's people that are registered to vote who never vote. And again, this list will tell you whether they're a hard Republican, weak Democrat, or vice versa. And this is important with what I'm about to explain. There are groups and people with nefarious plans who can use this information because they know who is likely to vote or who is unlikely to vote. And the unlikely to vote will probably never challenge a ballot or an election. And this is why, and this is important because this is one of the places where ballot harvesting comes from. So if you've heard of ballot harvesting, when this is how it's connected. Because the people that have nefarious plans in elections, they know those 1s, 2s, or 3s are the people who are 1, unlikely to vote, and 2, would definitely be unlikely to challenge a vote or an election. Now I'm going to repeat that again in just a minute. But those registrations are ripe for ballot harvesting for the people with nefarious plans who want to sway an election. And look, as much as we want to have confidence in our election systems and think it doesn't happen, it happens. If you take let's say a person with a 1, don't think for 1 minute that mail-in ballots, the actual paper mail-in ballot, is only accessible from a government office or a government or the voter's office handing or mailing that mail-in ballot to a certain individual. While that is how it's supposed to happen, government agencies are not the ones printing the mail-in ballots. It's independent companies that print the mail-in ballots, printing companies that will actually mail the boxes and thousands of these pre-printed mail-in ballots to the government agencies who then disperse them. So yes, it is possible, in my opinion, my hypothesis, and the opinion and hypothesis and research from many thousands of other people and groups who have researched this. So again, when I first came up with this, when I first was running for office and I saw that, wow, here is a weak spot. I mean, this is really weak. I mean, somebody who doesn't vote, their vote could be stolen in many ways, which I'll explain too in a second. But then as I've researched it, I have found that I'm not alone. There are, again, thousands of other people. And I just went to the Mike Lindell event where I met other groups of other people that are knocking on doors to solve this problem. Many people have asked and talked about, well, why don't they just take all those mail-in ballots to court and prove that those people didn't vote? That would mean thousands of people getting subpoenaed. So let's back up a second again and cover this. So you've got 1s, 2s, 3s that are public information. It's on the voting rolls. Anybody can order it from the Secretary of State. That people realize, hey, that person is unlikely to vote. So if they have nefarious plans, maybe they're being hired by a group or a candidate or somebody to help sway an election. And yes, they can get ballots from outside sources, printing companies, or extra ballots. However they source their ballots, they can get ballots. They can simply take that 1, that 2, that 3, fill out a mailing ballot in their name and mail it in. Or in the case of Pennsylvania, Michigan, we heard the stories of the hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots showing up in boxes in the middle of the night. I'm not saying that this is necessarily how this happened, but I'm saying that this is likely how it happened with ballot harvesting, because those people that have nefarious plans can go in the voting rolls, see who is unlikely to vote in an election, the 1s, the 2s, the 3s. And in other states, they call them different things. I'm referring more to what Louisiana calls them, but you can get the idea that those 1s, 2s, 3s are unlikely to vote. So that's where the ballot harvesting comes from. And people can take their votes and put in a mail-in ballot. So when people ask me, well, why don't they just take all these ballots to court and prove that those people didn't vote? You would need those thousands of people that have mail-in ballots to show up to court, or subpoena them to show up in court and have those people testify, hey, I did not vote. That mail-in ballot is not mine. I didn't vote. Of course, jokingly, hey, didn't you see I'm a 1, 2, or 3? I'm unlikely to vote, but I didn't cast that mail-in vote. It is unlikely that you will be able to get those people who have a ballot for them representing their registration, but not their actual vote. It is unlikely to get them to show up in court. And so when people say, Why can't we, we just challenge those ballots? The people that are at the upper echelons know that it is unlikely to win this in court. And on the flip side of it, that they also know the people in the upper echelons of the campaign world who aren't bringing this to court know that it is unlikely to go through to challenge the votes, because if the person doesn't show up, this to say they didn't vote, again, ones, twos, and threes are going to be they're not only unlikely to vote, but unlikely to show up in court to challenge the vote. The people in the upper echelons also know that when a judge says, because they do not want to disenfranchise anybody, so a judge knows that when the attorneys for campaigns know, when they match a ballot, a mailed-in ballot, to a registration list, they know that when you match up, you say, okay, this person is registered. Here is their mail-in ballot. They're registered to vote, and here's their mail-in ballot. They can't go any further with it. They can't disenfranchise the vote, nor will they try, even if they suspect that it's not a legal ballot. They're not going to take it any further than that. It's not, and the people that are ballot harvesting know that this is how they get away with it, because the votes are not going to be challenged, because the voters are not going to show up with ones, twos, threes, where these mail-in ballot harvests come from. And the attorneys know that if they don't show up, that when a ballot is challenged, all they're going to do is match a ballot to a registration and say, well, it's going to be considered a legitimate vote. And that, my friends, is the biggest problem in our mail-in ballot system, because that is where the ballot harvesting comes from, on the ones, the twos, and the threes. And this is one of the reasons why we need to not only update, which I'll explain in a minute, our election rolls, but why we should consider forensic audits in every parish, for Louisiana, county, or state that you live in. Automatically, citizens groups need to get on this. It's going to be a pain for our elected officials. I understand that. They're not going to like it. They're not going to like getting forensic audits. But until this gets fixed, this is what we need to do, because the more we get into the forensic audit systems, and when we get, the more that we get into this system, it's going to chase out the people that are in there using the bad information or using the non-chronic voters in their nefarious plans to ballot harvest. This is another reason why, and I'm reaching out to the people that don't vote or don't vote regularly. If you don't think your vote matters, use it, or someone else will. Your vote matters not just so we can get the elected officials in office that need to be in office, that believe in what you believe in. And if we get good candidates and we're always voting, we're going to be able to always be able to keep better candidates in office and help them get in office. It's the only way to be able to make sure that our government is being run the way it wants. Now I'm speaking the common sense stuff on why your vote matters. Because let me tell you this, they are paying attention. Whether you like it or not, whether you really think your vote matters or not, government is paying attention. The people who count the votes are paying attention. And maybe they win an election 51-49. Let me say it this way. Maybe that tax you didn't like wins 51-49 through no other reason than just it was popular. Or maybe because the non-chronic votes were used to help get taxes through. Or maybe there's a corporate entity that wants certain legislation to get through or certain bills to pass, or in the case of our voting, they get things through constitutional amendments, or maybe they just get things on the ballot. For instance, in St. Tammany Parish here in Louisiana, it's going to be on the ballot for another casino license to be moved to St. Tammany Parish, and it's going to be on the elections, I think in October. So maybe you've seen too many times your wills, your desires not get passed, and the elections are 51-49 against you. Don't think for 1 minute that the people counting the votes are not paying attention to the fact that 49.9 or whatever percentage it might be, I'm exaggerating just to make my point. Don't think for 1 minute that they don't realize that they only won by a little bit. Don't think for 1 minute that the ones that are harvesting the ballots of the ones that don't vote, the non-chronic voters, and let's say maybe they know they won by 60%, and they know that their ballot harvesting only amounted to 5%. Don't think for 1 minute that they're not paying attention to all the people that are against them. They are paying attention, and this is another reason why your vote matters. Because even if your issues don't get through, know that they recognize how many people are still against them. And I don't mean this in a conspiratorial way or a non-professional way, because we all know that oftentimes elected officials just think differently from us. They just want things differently. They get in the system and all of a sudden taxes are good. When they ran against taxes, all of a sudden they realize, well, we need more taxes to fix the potholes so I can get reelected and be able to keep my job that has my secretary who makes my doctor appointments also, or my government paid car, my government paid insurance. Not all elected officials think that way, but I can guarantee you, or have a good opinion on the fact that it happens. And again, this is why your vote matters. But I'm going to go back to the biggest reason your vote matters is because if you don't use your vote and you become a 1, a 2, a 3 on the chronic voter scale, they're going to realize that they can steal your vote in other ways or use it in the ballot harvesting methods. Again, this is something that was my opinion, which became a hypothesis, which as I started talking about it in the inner circles, started finding that there are groups and people out there that realize that this is happening, and this is where the weak part of our election systems are. So use your registration. And this is just one of many reasons to vote and encourage other votes. This is not just my opinion, but one of many. There are groups out there knocking on doors to verify registrations, citizen activists who are going door to door who are saying, did you vote in the last election? And they're finding people who say, no, I didn't vote. And they're finding people who might be for registrations in a house. And they might say, well, we voted, but our son didn't, our daughter. So it's happening. People are realizing that their voter registrations are being used if they're not using, and there are groups out there that I will have on my show coming up. So one thing you can do is look for these groups to help them, or start one in your own area by contacting another one and finding out what they're doing. The other thing we can do is to call for a forensic audit in every parish, county, and state. We may not overturn any election in the past, but maybe we can not only safeguard elections in the future, but we can expose and chase out the people who have figured out how to harvest more ballots within the system by simply working in our system to correct our registrations and our problems in there. In Arizona, it's going to be coming out how many problems, how many inaccuracies they found by simply doing a forensic audit. This is going to be something that we need to start doing. And again, we can reach out to our legislators to possibly have some sort of a trigger, some sort of automatic legislation that calls for forensic audits, whether they're random or every election, to make sure that our elections are safe and make sure that our elections in the future are not only safe but accurate, because we need to rebuild the confidence in our election systems. This has not been a very public issue, but more and more people are starting to talk about it, and more citizen groups are starting to correct it. And the reason why, which I'll say again, is because nobody wants somebody's vote to be disenfranchised. So people are very careful. Start connecting with your state legislators to call for a forensic audit in your state. Find the ones that will listen and help create legislation that will help clean up the voter registrations in your state. It's no different than the groups that show up to the Capitol to stop mandates or vaccines or children issues or whatever issues. They show up for the Capitol to be able to let their voices heard. Because if we show up to correct our voting rolls at the Capitols and the legislative sessions, we will stop the infringement on our freedoms. This process is not a popular idea because there are groups out there that will say people are being or will be disenfranchised. Their votes are going to be disenfranchised if we clean up the voter rolls, because they're worried that the very few people that may have a vote disenfranchised because there's an inaccuracy, maybe they move for a short time and move back. But I can tell you the overwhelming larger percentage of inaccuracies on our voting rolls far outweigh the very small percentage, 0.5% or whatever it may be, of people that may be disenfranchised. But if we do it the right way, nobody will be disenfranchised, and our elections will be more secure and operate better, more efficiently, and be more accurate. This is another reason the voter rolls are just left alone for the most part, and this is why it has to be brought out or thought out with legislators. Let me be clear in my closing statements. I am in no way blaming any Secretary of State or employees of the Secretary of State or state workers or any elected officials. In no way, shape, or form am I blaming them for any of these inaccuracies. I personally just think there are not systems in place to automatically update or take action because there are people in the past that or elections processes that are just being sensitive to voter rights, which is a good thing. But we need to go in, delve into this a little bit more and figure out where the inaccuracies are and create some policies that will correct our voting rolls so that will reduce ballot harvesting. Because the bad thing that comes out of not doing anything is not only ballot harvesting and inaccurate elections, but it will be on a greater scale disenfranchising voters if we don't take action to clean up our election systems, find the inaccuracies. Then and only then will we be able to stop the disenfranchisement of all voters in our state, because if we don't do this, pretty soon elections will be so bad and inaccurate that indeed nobody's vote counts, which is the reason that we not only need to fix through this system, but encourage the non-chronic voters to use their vote to use their rights to, whether they believe it matters or not, to get out and vote and let their votes be heard. So then, and only then, will we have less ones, twos, and threes that get their ballots harvested to vote possibly some way that they didn't want to vote. Thank you all so much for tuning in and taking some time here with me. And please check out my Facebook page, my social media, all William Wallis for America. Again, the last name is Wallis. And subscribe to my podcast. And please, everybody, share the information, motivate others to vote, and motivate others to be, and enlighten other people, educate other people on where the ballot harvesting is happening and that it is possible. It's not a conspiracy theory. It is possible, and we need to do something about it. So not only will our votes matter, not only will our votes make a difference, but we will get honest, fair, accurate elections in the future where nobody is disenfranchised. Have a great day.